Hi, it's Angie from Organic Plant Magic. Have you ever wondered, does potting soil go bad and can potting soil expire? I get it. I mean, I'm totally guilty of grabbing a ton of stuff and then sometimes forgetting that I stash a few bags in the shed. And I also have old potted up, pots in the garden that were potted out with lettuces and stuff last year, and right now they're sitting dormant. So what should I do? Should I throw it away? Is it safe to use? Is it bad? I get it. There's a lot of things that go on with potting soil. So the answer to that question is, does potting soil go bad? It's kind of a yes and a no. There's actually 4 things that you can look for that could be potential issues with potting soil. Now, we're talking potting soil in the bag, either opened, unopened, and even potting soil that has already been used and in pots and being used at this time. So like AKA houseplants. What do you do when you have some of these issues with your houseplants? One thing you want to look for are pests. Are you seeing fruit flies and ants and other little pests being attracted to your potting soil? That is definitely one obstacle, and it does happen. Usually if you're seeing fruit flies, it's because you have standing water and soggy soil. First approach to that is to stop watering so much and pay attention to your watering schedule. And secondly, just make sure if you have the little drain trays under your pots, that you're emptying them. So if they're filling up with standing water, of course insects are gonna go there. It's a great source of moisture for them. Second obstacle is, are you seeing moldy and little fungi in your potting soil? Totally happens. That could be due to some of the ingredients that are in there. And it can also just be due to the environment. A little too much moisture, a little overwatering. That does happen in the bag, and it also can happen in pots. I've had a batch of houseplants that recently just sprouted a bunch of little mushrooms. Totally happens. You can remove the caps carefully, dispose of them, but sometimes it can get a little bit out of hand. So, third thing you're looking for is, does your soil look a little crusty, compacted, crackly on top? That means your potting soil has completely dried out and the soil structure itself is actually not so good. Happens sometimes from like extreme watering, where you're letting your plant really dry out and then you're watering a bunch and back and forth and back and forth. And it can even happen in a bag of potting soil if it got wet and then sat out in the sun and really dried out. At that point, you actually have a really hard time watering that soil. It's not going to retain the moisture. It's going to become really porous, and you can tell this by when you water your plant, if the water just goes straight through. Do you ever water a plant and all of a sudden it's like water's coming out all over the floor, all over the patio? It's because that potting soil actually has no porosity to it, and it's actually at a point that it probably needs to be rebooted a little bit. And then the 4th thing to look for, and this is a really big one, are your plants just not looking their best? This is usually a houseplant issue, but can also be for some of your potted plants on your patio. If your plants aren't looking your best, it's generally because there's no more nourishment left in that soil. And it happens over one growing season, because those plants, if they're a heavy feeder, they're feeding. And if you're not feeding them on a regular schedule, they do rely on you. And that soil then needs to be nourished. I used to have a professor in college say that soil that has no life in it is just dirt. So that means you need to take care of it. So with those 4 obstacles with potting soil, there's some really easy ways to fix it. 1, if you have potting soil that's attracting pests and fungi and mold, especially if this is an easy one, if it's in the bag, you can dump that bag out onto a cookie sheet, newspaper, or tarp, and dump it out in the sun and let the UV rays break that down. And what it'll do is the heat and the UV will start to kind of break down some of the spores, break down the pest eggs. Now, if it's really bad, you should definitely toss it and definitely start over. It's never a good idea to keep moldy, wet, pest-infested soil. So that's one way. If you're kind of still questioning if it's really good or not good, the other option you can do is to treat your soil with neem oil. So you can follow your manufacturer's instructions and just spray it down with a neem concentrate. That will help get rid of any pest eggs and if you're having fungal issues. If you're seeing compacted soil, the best thing you can do is actually dump that soil out. Now for houseplants, this means repot it. Patio plants, same thing. Dump that soil out. You can put it in a big tub, a bucket, whatever it takes, and reboot it with some really good organic matter. That means compost, worm castings, add in a really high-end quality organic plant food, and bring that dirt back to life. If you're having soil that's not performing, you're probably going to treat it about the same way you just did with that compacted soil. You're going to want to bring it back to life. So by adding in more nutrients, adding in a really good long-lasting plant food, and nourishing that soil, you're going to bring it back to life so that it can keep performing. I am not a fan of throwing away potting soil. It's kind of a bummer to see that people do that consistently. First of all, it's actually wasteful. It's consuming resources that we can reuse, and it's also costly. So if you have an option to reuse your soil, please do. Now, the second part of that question was, does potting soil expire? I get it, and I've actually seen dates on potting soil. So if you've ever taken a peek at our Organic Plant Magic compressed potting soil, on the back it actually states that it's good for 2 years after manufacturing. Now, why is that? Our potting soil is loaded with probiotics, which are beneficial living microorganisms. So we actually have a product that's alive. Is it good to use? Is it safe to use after those 2 years? Absolutely. It just means that it may not perform to its best. Now, not all potting soil is created equal, so you may not see that on some other packages, and I guarantee you not everybody has beneficial living microorganisms in their soil, but it doesn't hurt to take a peek at the back of those packages to see what the manufacturer says. So, does potting soil go bad? Yes and no. Can you run into some problems? Absolutely. And does potting soil expire? Yes and no again. With a little bit of know-how and just a little bit of reading and some insight, you can pretty much fix most problems with potting soil. So happy gardening and have an amazing day.